In the series Imperfect Women, we are introduced to Eleanor, Elle to those closest to her, a driven, self-made woman running her own nonprofit organization. At the center of the story is her tight-knit trio of friendships with Nancy and Mary, bonds forged over 25 years and now tested in the most devastating way possible. Let's take a little step forward to the present day. Elle is being questioned by detectives, clearly a person of interest in something serious. From there, the story rewinds to set up how it all unraveled. On what should have been a light-hearted evening celebrating Mary's birthday, Nancy pulls Elle aside and drops a bombshell. She has been carrying on an affair behind her husband Robert's back, which she promised to end a while back. But surprisingly, Elle is unsympathetic. She had already urged Nancy to end things, and Nancy hasn't. The man at the center of it all goes by David, someone Nancy crossed paths with through her philanthropic work on various charity boards. Elle doesn't get much time to process any of it because she feels Nancy is being ungrateful for having such a great husband and still wanting to cheat. Elle was not hearing any of that nonsense Nancy was talking about, feeling free and seen whenever she is around David. In the early hours of the morning, Elle gets a panicked call from Robert. Nancy hasn't come home. Elle suspects that Nancy is with the David guy and tries to call her so that they could get their stories straight, but Nancy is unreachable. With Robert on the verge of calling the police and no cover story to hide behind, Elle makes the difficult decision to tell him the truth about the affair. The confession barely settles before officers arrive at the door with news of a dead body found in a local park, identified by documents found nearby as Nancy's. She was struck from behind. Robert Hennessy, Nancy's husband, wealthy, well-connected, and without a credible alibi for the night of Nancy's death, seems like the primary suspect. And just like every Nepo baby, his family moves quickly into damage control mode, with his sister pushing to get ahead of the story before public narrative turns against him. Nancy's teenage daughter, Cora, is drowning in grief and guilt, haunted by a routine moment of teenage indifference. She regrets not hanging out with her mom more, and for declining an invitation from her mom when she asked to take her shopping. She asks Elle to stay close to the family for a few days. Her reason is quiet, disturbing, or should I say, off-putting. She doesn't feel safe with her father. She says nothing more, but she doesn't need to. What makes Robert harder to defend, though, is a detail Mary quietly shares with Elle. Hy has a history of violence, one linked to his drinking. He had been sober for 2 weeks before Nancy's murder, but a short streak of sobriety doesn't erase a pattern. The most visceral glimpse into Robert's temperament comes when he discovers a painting in the house. A nude portrait of Nancy, clearly the work of her lover. He destroys it completely, shutting out every attempt to calm him down. When detectives question Elle, her answers raise more questions than they settle. 25 years of close friendship, and all she can offer is a first name. David? I mean, friends of that long usually have more details about whom their friend is having an affair with, where he lives, and how long they've been seeing each other. The detectives don't buy it, and they make clear she isn't free to leave town, even without enough to hold her. The investigation surfaces a name, D.H. Boyette, a painter with documented ties to Nancy's charity work, and even a piece of art hanging in her home. It's a plausible lead, but Elle isn't sold. Boyette is a black man, and as the only black woman in Nancy's inner circle, Elle is certain Nancy would have brought that up. The fact that she never did makes the connection feel off. She believes it must be another David. At Nancy's funeral, a stranger is seen lurking around in his denim jacket with a little bit of a disguise, and that is definitely someone we are going to need to look into. Another thing I find odd is that Elle has always had feelings for Robert. Nancy knew. Mary knew. It was the kind of truth everyone understood, and no one was willing to address the elephant in the room. When Robert invites Elle to accompany him to the ballet, a place Nancy loved and he never went with her, Elle knows exactly how it looks and how it will look if the media found out. But I guess stealing your friend's husband has never stopped anyone before. By the end of the night, they've been photographed together, and those images are already on their way to becoming a problem. Elle is no stranger to what she feels for Robert, as they spontaneously gravitate towards each other, and the night at the ballet makes that harder to ignore. Their moment, however, is cut short when a photo of Nancy alongside David Boyette surfaces publicly, sending Robert's emotions into a sharp spiral. David was arrested, and somehow the focal point of his arrest was centering around robbery charges because there was no evidence to prove that he murdered Nancy. It's looking like someone is trying to frame him. I might be wrong, but let's proceed. When Robert drops Elle home, she finds Jordan waiting. A little backstory on Jordan. He is her situationship subordinate coworker, whom she has always kept a secret, and he isn't in a good mood. He points out that on the night of Nancy's murder, Elle was supposed to arrive at his place by 10 in the evening. She didn't show up until 1 in the morning. 3 hours are completely unaccounted for. Rather than being transparent about it, Elle attempts to nudge Jordan into remembering the timeline differently. And in a telling reversal, she encourages him to go public with their relationship if the police come asking, essentially positioning him as a potential alibi. For someone who has kept Jordan firmly at arm's length, the whole gimmick of coming clean now with the relationship sounds fishy. The next morning, Elle notices a car that has been showing up a little too consistently at the ballet and now outside her home. It turns out the surveillance isn't from the police or the press. It's coming from her own brother, who has been keeping close tabs on Elle, particularly now that she is entangled in a murder investigation and spending time with the widower at the center of it. When they have a conversation, Elle finds out why Robert chose Nancy over her all those years ago. It turns out it had nothing to do with his feelings. Rather, her brother had intervened directly, warning Robert to stay away from Elle on the grounds that the Hennessy family was dangerous and would readily throw anyone under the bus to keep their family name clean. Howard believes they arranged David Boyette's arrest, which obviously had nothing to do with Nancy's murder. He was picked up on a robbery charge, a move orchestrated by the Hennessy family's crisis PR machine to redirect media scrutiny away from Robert at a critical moment. Howard tries to warn Elle to stay clear of the family, but she is too engrossed in the idea that Robert had been kept from her for years, and it looks like she wants him back. When Elle presses Robert on it, he claims he only found out after it was already done. It's the kind of answer that technically clears him of ordering it, while doing very little to clear him of benefiting from it. An innocent man was arrested to protect a family name, and Robert's distance from that decision is, at best, convenient. It's the Nepo baby treat for me. While Elle has been navigating her complicated feelings for Robert, Mary has been doing something more practical, chasing answers with an intensity that eventually gets her hauled in for harassing police officers. She submits a stack of public records requests and tracks down David Boyette's address herself. The two women show up at his gallery, and what they hear reframes the entire affair narrative. David tells them plainly, he and Nancy were never romantically involved. She had commissioned him to paint a portrait after seeing his work at a collector's event. That portrait, the explicit nude that sent Robert into a rage, was a piece of art, nothing more. David also mentions that he saw Nancy at a party with an unidentified white man who seemed unhappy to be there. When Mary raises the possibility that it could have been Robert, Elle shuts the idea down immediately and without hesitation. I just feel Elle thinks Robert is innocent and she's doing everything she can to protect him. A reaction that speaks volumes about how objectively she is actually approaching any of this. Before they leave, David tells them that he observed Nancy had been carrying real emotional pain, and the people closest to her hadn't seen it. Which says a lot if they're claiming to be her friends without even knowing she was passing through a lot. Back at Nancy's house, Elle accompanies Robert to go through Nancy's belongings at their lake house. The emotional weight of the visit, combined with years of unresolved feeling, leads to the two of them sleeping together. Elle is aware of exactly what line she has just crossed, but who cares as long as she gets to have her best friend's husband right. By morning, she is already rationalizing it, constructing a version of events in which this was inevitable. She even lies to herself, telling herself that Nancy would understand. She believes this isn't a betrayal, and that whether Nancy was dead or alive, this was bound to happen sometime soon. Then things take a turn when she finds the letter Robert wrote to Nancy. An apology, composed after he discovered the affair before Nancy's death. It means that Robert knew about the affair while Nancy was still alive. He has been performing the role of an unsuspecting, grief-stricken husband from the very moment the police arrived at his door, and every conversation he has had with Elle since then has been built on that carefully maintained lie. Stacking everything together, the picture around Robert grows harder to dismiss. His family's PR operation got an innocent man arrested to keep attention away from him. And less than 2 weeks after burying his wife, he has slept with her closest friend. If there's one thing this episode made crystal clear, it's that Elle is her own worst enemy. And watching her unravel in slow motion is equal parts frustrating and fascinating. She finally confronting Robert about Nancy's notebook and his letter. She looks him dead in the eye and asks if he killed her best friend. He denies it, but what he can't deny is the lying. Turns out Robert knew about Nancy's affair long before she died. Nancy had confessed, promised to end things, but refused to reveal who the man was. Robert claims he never found out. Whether I believe him is another story entirely. For a moment, it seems like Eleanor has enough sense to pump the brakes. She goes quiet and keeps her distance. Good for her, right? Not for long. After being honored at a society event, a shiny award for her charity work, she drives straight to the Ojai house and falls right back into bed with Robert. The two of them are laughing, splashing around in the pool without a care in the world, until Cora walks in with a friend and the mood crashes to the floor. This is where it gets genuinely painful. Cora has been leaning on Eleanor through the worst grief of her young life. The betrayal written across her face says everything. Robert and Eleanor tries to come up with a flimsy excuse as to why they are in the pool together, but Cora is sharper than they give her credit for. She sees exactly what's going on. Eleanor drives away the next morning, seemingly unbothered, until she gets to work and discovers that Cora has posted a TikTok telling the world that her mom's best friend is having an affair with her dad. She didn't name Eleanor directly, but she didn't have to. People connected the dots fast. And as if that wasn't enough, Jordan, clearly feeling some type of way after Eleanor ended things, called the police tip line and told them Elle didn't arrive at his place until around 1 a.m. the night Nancy died. Nancy's estimated time of death was midnight? That's a gap nobody's going to ignore. Rattled, Elle drives to Mary's, the one place that still feels grounded and real. Mary's husband is away interviewing for a job. Her daughter Artie is struggling, and the household has a quiet kind of weight to it. Elle finally comes clean about Robert and about the letter. I don't know what reaction she was expecting from Mary, maybe a pat on the back or a gold medal, but Mary's response stingy. She asked Elle to take the letter and all evidence to the police. But Elle refuses, which result into a messy argument. Mary was not having Elle's bullshit. She points out that Robert hasn't actually chosen Elle. Not really, and she's having a fantasy about her best friend's husband. Elle fires back that he's choosing her now. Things get uglier when Elle throws Mary's own past in her face. The fact that her marriage started with an affair, too, give her no right to be self-righteous around her. Back at the Hennessy mansion, with press camped outside Robert's home, Detective Gans visible on the scene, and the very real possibility that people are starting to make up that Robert and Elle conspired in Nancy's death, Robert pulls her aside, and the conversation is gutting. Eleanor talks about joint statements to deny the allegations and going public when they're ready, convinced they are facing this together, but Robert tells her his lawyers have advised him to cut off all contact. He also wants his letter back. Elle feels totally used, but perhaps she shouldn't be. He told her more than once that he still loved his wife. She watched him love Nancy for over 20 years and ignored her brother's warning when he told her that Robert would throw her under the bus if things go south. With Robert retreating into the shelter of his family and legal team, Elle turns to her brother Donovan. She walks her lawyers through the timeline of that night, dinner ending just after 9 p.m., heading toward Jordan's, a detour to pick up Marcus, Mary's teenage son, after he got into trouble with some bookies, then arriving at Jordan's around 1 a.m. She asks them to keep Marcus out of it, to protect him because he is on probation and shouldn't be gambling. As she was driving home, we see a glimpse of flashback from that night. As Eleanor was leaving dinner, Nancy caught up with her. She was scared. She begged Elle to come with her to help end things with David. She looked really desperate, but Elle refused. It turns out that Elle's disapproval of the affair was never really about morality. It was about the fact that Nancy already had Robert, the man Eleanor had quietly loved since she was 18 and still had the gut to cheat. 3 hours later, Nancy was dead, and Elle feels like it wouldn't have happened if she had just followed her. I think a Nancy backstory is long overdue. She steps into the spotlight as the sole narrator, and pulling back the curtain on the woman behind those flawless New Year's Eve parties. On the surface, Nancy has everything: a wealthy husband, a stunning home, and 18 years of social success. But the life she's built is less a dream and more an elaborate act of survival, one she's been performing since childhood. Through a series of flashbacks, we learn that young Nancy grew up in a volatile, neglectful home. Her mother's boyfriend, Scott, exploited her, and when her mother discovered the abuse, she turned her anger on Nancy rather than offering protection. The trauma culminated in a car crash caused by her mother's reckless driving, an incident that left physical and emotional scars Nancy has carried ever since. That backstory is the key to understanding everything that follows. Nancy married Robert partly to escape that world, and she's spent nearly 2 decades desperate to prove she belongs in his. Early in their marriage, Robert was warm and attentive young love type of thing, but now he's distant, drinks more than usual, and quietly resents her spending habits. Nancy senses something is badly wrong, and when she stumbles onto Robert's laptop and finds emails hinting at a separation of assets, her worst fears start to feel very real. The tension radiates outward all evening, coupled with the fact that Robert's family is clearly hiding something, and Nancy's attempts to find out what, first through Harlan, their family lawyer, then through her father-in-law, get politely shut down. Robert's sister, Kit, takes it a step further, warning Nancy to stay out of family business and delivering a stinging suggestion that Nancy's entire life has been built on transactions. That word, transactional, hits deep. It echoes how Nancy learned to survive as a girl, and it's the lens through which she's always operated, even if she'd never admit it. Her friendship with Mary is the exception. She tells Mary she always wished she could have had her as a mother, giving us a glimpse of just how hungry Nancy has always been for genuine connection. But there's also a subtle ache there. Mary's life isn't perfect either. Howard has had his teaching load cut again. Money is tight, and pride makes it all harder to navigate. Nancy wants to help, so she talks to one of the benefactors of her charity work to employ Howard for the time being and take some load off Mary. Then comes the moment that breaks the night open. Nancy discovers Cora and her friends dressed in what they're calling white trash costumes, and Nancy, already stretched thin and trembling with anxiety, slaps her daughter in front of everyone. She immediately regrets it, spiraling outside into a full panic attack while Mary and Elle rush after her. Something about the way her daughter dressed reminds her of her past, a place she never wants to visit again. Nancy has spent her entire adult life trying to outrun her past, and in one unraveling moment, she becomes the very thing she feared most: her own mother. She pulls herself together, goes back inside, and tries to apologize to Cora. But Robert is already there comforting their daughter, and when Nancy tries to address what's fracturing between her and Robert, he shuts that down too. Toward the end of the evening, with Howard, he mentions that Phil, who just offered him a job, accidentally called him David. Nancy mentions that Phil still calls her Louise. He pretty much forgets everyone's name. So she calls him David, he calls her Louise. We also get a glimpse into the depths of Nancy's inner world, specifically her childhood obsession with ballet, which began at age 9. What's quietly devastating is the detail that her discipline as a dancer was partly fueled by a tolerance for pain she had already developed from life at home. She learned early how to keep her composure on the outside while falling apart within. And honestly, that's the theme carrying the entire episode. 2 months before Nancy's death, the tension at home is impossible to ignore. Robert is distracted, distant, and drinking more than he should. He's missing dinners and dismissing Nancy's creative consultancy work as though it barely matters. Nancy, understandably, is frustrated, not just by his absence, but by feeling unseen in her own home. But contrary to what she assumed, Robert wasn't pulling away because he wanted to divorce her. He had made a catastrophic investment decision, convincing his father to put 20% of their holdings into what turned out to be a sinking ship of debt. The fallout meant Robert had to use his personal portion of the family trust to cover the damage, effectively handing financial control back to his father. The asset separation Nancy stumbled upon on his laptop was him trying to stash her settlement money in an offshore account, so that his father couldn't strip her bare in the event of a possible divorce, because he assumed Nancy would leave once the trust money was gone. It's one of the most honest moments between them. They get vulnerable and tender with each other, but it arrives just a little too late. Nancy's involvement in the ballet production of Ariadne brings her closer to Howard, Mary's husband, who has been brought on to provide historical context for the Greek myth at the center of the play. What starts as a professional arrangement shifts gradually into something far more personal. Howard sees Nancy clearly: her intelligence, her ambition, the parts of herself she keeps tucked away, and the softer parts her husband was too consumed by himself to notice. That kind of attention is hard to resist when your husband barely looks up from his glass. The affair develops slowly enough that you almost understand how Nancy got there, even if you can see the damage coming from a mile away. There's also the matter of Scott, a figure from Nancy's past. He was her mother's boyfriend, and his presence here is disturbing rather than romantic. Nancy confides in Howard that she recently reached out to Scott and admits she's drawn to the danger of not knowing whether she'll be caught, just like back in the day when she was sneaking around with Scott while he was dating her mother. Howard calls her a fire starter, and it's meant almost as a compliment. She starts flirting at a party, ending up on Davide's lap, something she initiates, not him, and continues to meet Howard even as her guilt builds. Once she learns the truth about Robert's intentions, she tries to end things. But Howard doesn't take the rejection quietly. During opening night of Ariadne, he corners her and threatens to tell Robert everything. Nancy calls his bluff and walks away, but the threat hangs in the air. Then comes the twist. Robert gets to her phone first. He sees the messages and the photos, images of Nancy that suggest she has been seeing someone behind his back, possibly for a while. Who took them and why is the question that lingers. Scott is the obvious candidate, but his absence from the current timeline makes it more complicated. Robert's reaction is explosive, as expected. So Nancy flees the house in her car. But the most unsettling moment comes as she drives away, when the camera reveals that Mary is following her. Up until now, Mary has functioned as the steady, supportive friend, the one Nancy vents to, the one who reassures and listens. But here she is, trailing Nancy in the dark. And it turns out there's a lot more to her than the steady, quietly supportive friend we thought we knew. The episode frames Mary's story through a writing workshop, where she's been encouraged to channel her experiences onto the page. It's a clever device because Mary is sharply self-aware. She knows she's not the most naturally sympathetic figure, and she knows that next to Nancy, the glamorous, magnetic, perfect blonde, she's always been easy to overlook. Growing up as the oldest of 5 kids on a pot farm in the 80s, Mary learned early to be resourceful and imaginative rather than entitled. She never felt deprived. She just got on with it. That quiet resilience has defined her adult life too. Howard comes home with news that feels like good news on the surface. A significant job offer, a step up, a fresh start. The catch is that it requires the family to relocate to Ohio, which means Mary has to abandon her entire existence and move. She reminds him that they had an agreement. Once the kids were settled in school, it would be her turn to build something for herself and get back to work. Howard brushes that aside almost immediately, and when Mary pushes back, he brings up her previous struggle with substance use. It's the kind of dismissal that makes clear this isn't the first time her voice has been the one that didn't count. Mary eventually caves. And before Howard even makes it upstairs, she quietly stashes the Adderall she picked up earlier, tucked inside a fancy candy container, and takes a few. Later, the police arrive with questions about Eleanor and Robert's affair, which has now made Eleanor a person of interest in Nancy's murder. Mary refuses to believe Eleanor could be involved in anything like that. But the interview takes a turn when investigators reveal that Mary herself was heavily intoxicated the night Nancy died, drunk enough that she had to be taken home by an Uber. Howard's account places her in bed by 10:30. It's a tidy alibi. Maybe too tidy. Meanwhile, Marcus quietly fills in another gap, telling his mother that Eleanor came to help him with a debt situation that night, which gives Eleanor an alibi. And that when he got home later, Mary was asleep and Howard was nowhere to be found. That means everyone had an alibi except Howard. The real turning point comes when Mary finds a page from Howard's poetry tucked inside Nancy's sketchbook. The line on it was something Howard had once used specifically to win Mary over back in college. Back when Mary was still his mistress, she had believed it was private, meant only for her. Finding it in Nancy's things makes the implication impossible to avoid. When she confronts Howard, he doesn't answer the question. Instead, he pivots to her past, her addiction struggles, her reliability, her judgment. It's a masterclass in gaslighting, and I genuinely feel like I need to take notes. And it's clearly not the first time he's done it. Mary is shaken, but she doesn't stop digging. She searches the house for the blazer Howard wore the night Nancy died. She doesn't find it. What she finds instead is Nancy's ring, the one Nancy wore almost every day, sitting in Howard's closet. That's the moment denial stops being an option. Determined to understand exactly who she married, Mary tracks down Jenny, Howard's ex-wife. Howard had always framed Jenny as unstable and troubled, someone who had attempted self-harm multiple times, and Mary had accepted that version of events without question. Jenny tells a very different story. Howard had affairs throughout their marriage, multiple ones, often with his own students. Mary wasn't a special case. She was just the one who stayed. More disturbing still, Jenny had never attempted suicide the way Howard described. What actually happened was that when Jenny tried to leave, Howard pushed her down the stairs. He doesn't just manipulate. When faced with rejection, he gets physical. Mary leaves that conversation a fundamentally different person. The pattern is clear now. The control, the charm used as a weapon, the way he rewrites history to make himself the reasonable one and everyone else the problem. Just as Mary begins to find her footing, reconnecting with Eleanor, finally saying out loud the things she's been afraid to think. She married a monster. And then Howard calls. Their daughter Artemis is in the hospital. She's ingested a large quantity of pills, Mary's pills, the Adderall she'd hidden earlier. The timing, happening precisely as Mary starts pulling away and uncovering the truth, is too convenient to ignore. So my question is, did Howard orchestrate this? Did he deliberately make his daughter ingest Mary's medication just to make her look unreliable? Mary is pulled back into guilt, back into dependency, back under his control. And he gets to be the one making the phone call. Artemis is still fighting for her life, and the tension in that hospital hallway is suffocating. She pulls through, thankfully, but the relief is short-lived because things are about to get a whole lot worse for Mary. While Mary keeps vigil at her daughter's bedside, Child Protective Services show up with an emergency protective order. She can no longer be alone with her children while an investigation into the pill incident plays out. Howard, naturally, is the one pushing this narrative, painting Mary as negligent, despite the fact that those pills were on the highest shelf in the house, completely out of reach for any child. Mary knows this, and we, the audience, know this. But knowing something and proving it are two very different things. What follows is a masterclass in slow-burn psychological torment. Mary confronts Howard directly, accusing him of poisoning Artemis, and for a moment it feels like she might finally crack him. Instead, she's the one who cracks, lunging at him in the hospital corridor, giving him exactly the kind of footage that makes her look unstable. She takes what she has to Detective Gans, Nancy's ring, the torn page from Howard's poetry book, convinced this is enough to at least get him into a room with fingerprint ink on his hands. Gans isn't moved. Howard had already beaten Mary to the station that morning, dropping off a box of Nancy's belongings and spinning a story about Mary being obsessively jealous of her dead friend. The box contained items Mary had been quietly stealing from Nancy's home for years. Small things Nancy would never notice were gone, like her perfume and some jewelry. In one move, Howard turned Mary's own behavior into a weapon against her. Mary and Eleanor regroup and bring in a private investigator connected to Eleanor's legal team. He walks them through the crime scene theory. Nancy was shoved into a wall with enough force to fracture her skull, then dragged by her ankles toward the water. Midway through, the killer switched to one hand, suggesting some kind of injury. A bad shoulder, maybe. And who do we know with a shoulder problem? Howard. So Mary does something reckless. She goes back to the house to find his medical records. Howard is there. Of course he is. He corners her and does what he does best. He threatens, manipulates, and dismantles her self-confidence. He tells her that even if he goes to prison, the children won't go to her. Her mother runs a cannabis farm. Eleanor is too tied to the case, and foster care becomes the only option. He has clearly thought of everything, and he is 5 steps ahead of her. Then comes the real grenade. Howard reveals that the items Mary stole from Nancy weren't random trinkets. They were props. Mary used to dress in Nancy's clothes and jewelry, and the two of them would role-play, with Howard pretending she was Nancy. It's deeply unsettling, and it completely pulls the rug out from under any story Mary could tell the police. Howard makes it clear. Go to the authorities with his records, and he takes her down with him. And their kids will be left in the care of the system. On the drive back to Eleanor's, she asks to be let out of the car. By the middle of the night, she's crept back to Howard's door, telling him she won't say a word. Eleanor wakes up to an empty bed and drives straight to the house. When Howard refuses to let her in, she catches a glimpse of Mary watching from the window, before Mary simply turns and walks away. But Eleanor doesn't give up. She drives to Robert's house, finds him drunk and being lectured by his father, and lays it all out. Howard killed Nancy, and he was the man she was seeing. Robert, in what might be his best scene of the series, stands up to his father and gives him an ultimatum. Make the call for Howard's arrest, or watch the family name get dragged through every scandal they've buried over the years. Detective Gans arrives at Mary and Howard's house during a quiet family breakfast, warrant in hand. As officers escort Howard out, he makes one final move, telling Gans that DCFS needs to be called because Mary can't be left alone with the children. Even in handcuffs, the man is still playing chess. Mary has to watch her kids being taken away. Again, and then the episode closes on Eleanor, sitting alone in front of her television as a breaking news alert changes everything. An anonymous tip led police to CCTV footage of Scott Reed, Nancy's stepfather, near the park on the night of her murder. He is now the prime suspect, and a search is underway. At this point, I genuinely have no idea who to suspect anymore. After 7 episodes of slow-burning tension, here comes the finale, which was never really about solving a murder. It was about what happens to the people left standing once the truth finally surfaces. The season-long question of who killed Nancy gets its answer here, and it lands exactly where most viewers suspected. Howard killed Nancy. But the how and the why matter far more than the who ever did. Nancy had gone to the bridge that night to end things. She was not fleeing. She was not confused. Just a woman who had finally decided that the affair, the blackmail, and the suffocating grip Howard had on her life were over. But Howard had never once considered her an equal participant in their relationship. In his mind, she did not get to decide when it ended. When she made it clear she was walking away, he shoved her. Her head hit the wall. He had somewhat convinced himself of his own version of events, that he had offered Nancy something beautiful, a life where she would be desired and adored, and she was willing to throw it all away just to tell Mary the truth. What we also learned is that Nancy herself had called Scott to the bridge that night as protection, since Eleanor had refused to go with her. She wanted someone there to keep Howard in check. She was afraid of him, and he had resorted to blackmailing her with intimate photos. But it was already too late. Scott arrived to find Howard crouching over Nancy's body, and his choice to run after witnessing that haunted the entire investigation. His account, shared through his lawyer in a tense meeting with Mary and Eleanor, finally fills in the gaps. It does not exonerate him entirely from his own complicated history with Nancy, but it removes him from the center of the crime. Now, stepping back to Howard, filing for emergency custody, Mary was already fighting uphill. He had the lawyers, the clean record, and the narrative, and he knew it. Mary's only play was character witnesses. With her friendship with Eleanor in tatters, she swallowed her pride and turned to Robert, Nancy's widower, laying out some painful home truths just to earn his support. It was a desperate move, and it showed. In court, Eleanor showed up for Mary and delivered a heartfelt endorsement until she didn't. Under questioning, she inadvertently admitted that Mary had driven under the influence of amphetamines with Juniper still in the car. The testimony collapsed on itself in real time. Fortunately, Howard's ex-wife, Jenny, Mary's ace card, came through. She painted a chilling portrait of a manipulative, violent man who had attacked her when she tried to leave him. It was damning, but not damning enough. The judge, faced with a medicated and unreliable mother on one side and an abusive husband on the other, ruled that neither parent was fit. The children went into social services. Temporarily. Howard lost his Ohio move. Mary lost her girls. Nobody won that day in court. Howard arrives at Mary's motel room, still convinced he can control the outcome. He takes her to the dead zone, the same place where Nancy died, and makes his intentions clear. But Mary has already begun to think several steps ahead. She lies about a meeting with Detective Gans, calls Eleanor, and deliberately drops the phone, leaving the line open so her friend can hear exactly where she is. When Eleanor arrives and runs Howard over with her car, Mary does not hesitate. She stabs him multiple times with the knife he brought to stage her own death. Howard's death closes the criminal case. With access to his phone and laptop, investigators eventually uncover evidence of the affair and the blackmail. Nancy, at least officially, receives something resembling justice. I feel like we deserve a little backstory on these three and their history. I mean, how did they manage to keep so many secrets from each other, and where exactly did the idea come from that sleeping with each other's husbands was acceptable? Somehow I was expecting some kind of plot twist. Anyway, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more.